It's Rick Jones, the captain of FishBait Marketing, coming back to you from the bridge. You know, in spite of this continuing pandemic, we still all need to create revenues for our businesses. You know, I have this very bad habit. I like to eat, usually on average around 3 times a day. And to do that, it takes resources like money. So today's show is going to be about part 1 of how to create more revenues. My special guest is Mark Briggs, longtime public relations specialist whose agency in Charlotte, North Carolina, TPC Growth, now helps other agencies grow their revenues. But his specialty is not new from new business, but rather new from existing clients. And I can't wait to dive into this with Mark. We'll also get back up on the soapbox and eat something really yummy on the road with Rick. So sit back. We know we have some choppy seas right now, but you're safe and sound from the bridge. In basketball, shooting makes up for a multitude of sins. I used to say, if you can shoot the basketball, you're going to probably play a little bit, and shooting in business is sales. Sales does that in business because revenues are the most essential part of a business. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Business Tithe. This book talks about the need for businesses to give something back to their communities. But guess what? Only profitable businesses can actually give back. And profitable businesses depend on revenues. Like most everything in business and life, you have to be intentional about growing revenues. Did you know that studies have shown that 80% of the people who set goals and write them down and read them daily actually achieve those goals? That's a pretty amazing statistic. And so if you're going to build revenues, you've got to have goals for your revenues. Hey, let's start today, though, with a little fun. You've heard of the bucket list, those things you want to do in your life before you kick the bucket. Do you have a list out there? I have a long list of things I still want to do in my life and in my business career, including dishes I want to eat, places I want to travel, and new things I want to learn and experience. I even hope to finish both a novel and a musical, and I've actually started writing both of those. I review my bucket list annually to decide which items I want to check off in the coming year. Leisure travel is very important to me, and obviously I have not been able to travel during this time. In fact, I had booked 13 different trips in 2020, of which I only took one. And so I'm going to have to adjust my bucket list coming out of the coronavirus. As of this day, I've actually been to 49 of the 50 states. Well, the one I haven't been to is North Dakota. I've never been to North Dakota. I'm a little afraid to go because I'm afraid if I get there, God may say I'm done. So I've instructed Charlotte on my deathbed to airlift me to North Dakota so that I can finish that bucket list. I've also been to 41 different countries, but I still have a long list of places I still want to go. And in fact, until this year, with all this craziness, I actually had a detailed plan for where I wanted to go and when I wanted to go over the next 10 years. I've got 2 grandboys that live in England, and I have a list of places I want to take them and things I want to do with them, both individually and together. I'm also very intentional each year of writing down projects I want to do in my home and in my garden, new places I want to eat, things I want to learn to cook. So I don't call myself not only a planner, I think I'm more of a squeezer. I'm someone who squeezes everything he can get out of life, everything that life has to offer. And you know what? It seems the more things I write down that I want to do, the more things I actually get done. Now, I got to be honest with you. I like money. I like making money because I really like spending money. And I like to spend on things that please me, my family, and my friends. And I like having resources to help other people. And so I urge you to start today by sitting down and making up your own bucket list. But now let's jump back into goals for revenues. What are you going to do to help your business? Each December, I sit down and reflect on the successes and accomplishments of the previous year. And I also make a list of things we wanted to accomplish that did not happen as we had planned. And then I start listing my revenue goals for the upcoming year. I am very intentional on what I feel we can accomplish each year, and I write down all of our goals, no matter how small. We start with financial goals. We have to plan to make a profit again in order to meet our expense obligations. We have to plan for cash flow as part of our financial goals. Part of our goals are what we call retention-based goals, current business lines, current products, and current customers that we intend to keep. But part of our goals are new products or lines of business we intend to launch, new customers we intend to pursue, and new expertise we intend to acquire. We have goals for top-line growth, bottom-line profitability, and market share gains. We have goals for current clients. We have goals for our current staff. We have goals for new staff in terms of training and promotions, but all are goals leading towards revenues. We have goals for marketing and communications. We have goals for annual meetings and how we celebrate. All of these are important. But we also do something that really became important this year. We do a thing called scenario planning. If this happens, then we'll do that. In good times, we maybe add staff or equipment. In bad times, we may have to make some personnel cuts or other budget-reducing activities. But I have to admit that I did not pre-plan for anything like COVID-19. But we had done something significant that ended up helping us. Several years ago, I started a retirement program called a SEP, a Simplified Employee Pension Program, and that allows us to put in tax-deferred dollars into each of our associates' retirement accounts. Now, we did this, number one, it helped me shelter a lot of income, but it also gave our staff a head start on some retirement funds. But once the coronavirus came around, our business completely stopped and we had zero income coming in. Thankfully, we had those SEP funds available for each of our associates to use. It reminds me of the Bible story where Joseph persuaded the Pharaoh in Egypt to store up grain in the good times before the drought came years later. Well, I had not intended on any drought years, but we were fortunately ready when this drought came. And I finally learned the hard way, they always come. So far, we've been fortunate to not have to use any of the SEP money. We got PPP money, we got a small business loan, but here's what I know. We can still use that amount of money for our staff. And that's good news for actually surviving in this environment. If you want specific outcomes, you'll need to develop specific goals for all phases of your business. Annual goals are like a roadmap, all the places you want to go and how to get there. But many things can change, don't we know that this year? And that's why you have to break down your annual goals into pieces. Firstly, you break them down into quarterly goals. I like to do this 1 month before the quarter begins. Then you can start this at any time during the year. Then I do monthly goals, followed by weekly goals, and ultimately daily goals. It's important to list daily goals before you develop your daily to-do list to make sure you're doing the right things to move your business along. Never confuse activity with achievement. And it's important to know that you're doing the right things that help you generate revenues. I also write down, I've told you this before, I write down my reward for the day. My old boss at Georgia Tech, Dr. Homer Rice, got me in this habit. Each day I select one thing I will do for myself or for someone else that serves as my reward for the day. It could be a phone call to an old friend. It could be a long walk with my dog, or watching something on television or Netflix, or maybe a special dinner with my wife. At the end of the year, I can look back and see 365 rewards. After all, life is why we work, and reviewing all of those daily rewards keeps us both balanced and motivated. Once you've created and, most importantly, written down all of your annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily goals, then you can go deeper into specific elements of these goals. And that's what we'll do next week from the Bridge. My guest today is Mark Briggs. Mark owns a unique agency whose clients are actually other agencies, and he helps them grow their revenues. Mark is a longtime public relations consultant who worked for many years at one of my favorite PR agencies, Taylor. Let's welcome Mark to the Bridge. Mark, greetings from Charleston. It's a nasty morning here with the tropical storm moving through, but I know you're going to bring us a little sunshine today.
I'm trying. The sun is out here in Charlotte, and I was just on the coast this week, so my family's on the coast of North Carolina, so they're kind of batten down the hatches as well, so I hope you guys stay safe.
Yeah, we started this thing about, trying to reason with hurricane season. It's just that time of year that we all got to be on guard. Now, I know you went, I want to talk a little bit about your background, but I know you went first to UNC Wilmington. So
I did.
You went to college at the beach, which is not a bad thing to do. And
I did.
And then did you go right to graduate school right after that, or did you work for a little while?
I did not. I worked for a little while. What's interesting is I had every intention of going to law school. That was my plan. And my last semester in college, I come to find out I was one credit or one class short of a minor in communications. So my senior year, I took an intro to PR class, and there was a gentleman who had retired from Fleischman Hillard or from Omnicom's, a number of big agency experiences, but he had retired in Wilmington, was teaching a PR class, and so I took this intro to PR class. And it kind of set me on fire, man. It was really kind of the first time I sat in a class and was like, man, I want to do that. How do I figure out how to do that? And, lo and behold, I happened to be back in my hometown near Jacksonville, North Carolina. I grew up in a little town, Ripslands, North Carolina. And I happened to be back in town, and I was in a drugstore. And I bounced into the sports editor there. And he remembered me from playing ball in high school, and what happened to you, that type of thing. What's next? And I was like, I was told a great place to start if you don't have any experience, because again, I had no experience. I had just taken this class, was, a great place to start was in a newsroom. And so he asked, would I be interested in coming in and interviewing for a job? And so I did. And, the funny thing, Rick, now, it's funny now, it wasn't funny then, but they asked me, can you bring in some writing samples? And I'd never taken a journalism class. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. I've got some writing samples. So I took in some old English lit papers that I had written. And, I met, you were talking about like a small, 30, 40,000 daily at the time. And I went and met with him, and I met with the editor. And they looked at my papers, and they kept very straight professional faces. I'm sure they had a great laugh after I left. But, they called me up and said, listen, we can't offer you a job because you don't have any experience. But it's obvious you can string a sentence together. Would you be interested in an internship? And so that's what I did. And so I took an internship. And 3 years later, I was assistant sports editor and youngest syndicated columnist in North Carolina. And I was enjoying that. But at the same time, being a young person working in a newsroom, it takes you out of life's loop. Everybody's going out at night, and I'm having to work nights and weekends. So I did. I worked for about 3 years, and I left there and went back to grad school at NC State. And they had just started a sports management program there. So that's what I did. I went to I worked for 3 years and I went to grad school.
One of my mentors is a guy named Bob Cohn, and he started an agency called Cohn and Wolf, a
Oh
very
yeah, yeah.
successful PR firm. And I worked for Bob at one time. That's how he started. He'd gone to the University of Alabama and started in a newsroom. And so, candidly, in the PR business of that era, that was probably a pretty good place to start.
And I'm telling you, listen, it taught me resourcefulness. It taught me to be, a little self-sufficient. I see so many young people today, or over the last 20 years, that, they come out of the J school at, pick a university, and because they've had a couple classes, they think they're ready to roll. But the practicality of it, I got more of an education in that newsroom than I got in any classroom, and it's behooved me all the way through.
Well, it's interesting. I had done a similar path in that I had got out of undergraduate school and became a teacher and a coach, and then ultimately became a college coach. But by the time I went back to graduate school in sports management, I had questions. I mean, I tell young people, don't go directly to law school. Don't go directly to, I guess medical school's a different animal, but law
Sure,
school or
sure.
go get your MBA or go get a master's in sports management. No, 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 no. Go out and work and find out what questions you want answered next.
That's a great point.
And I think you probably did that at NC State. So you get out with that degree, and then what happened?
Well, at the time, uh, Jen Goodman, who runs WRAL and owns that Capital Broadcasting over in Raleigh, and I think they own some stations over here in Charlotte. He was leading a bid to try to bring the Pan Am Games to North Carolina, and so I was so far behind. I'm older at this point, and so I volunteered. That's another thing too, that's so many. Lots of times now you get paid for your internship. In fact, it might even be mandatory. I'm not sure, but I volunteered for the bid committee, and long story short, I ended up becoming the assistant to the president of the bid, this woman named Winky LaForce, and Winky kind of took me under her wing, and I worked on that bid, trying to bring the Pan Am Games to the Raleigh Durham area, and that we lost. We lost the bid. I learned a lot about the politics of the USOC and the voting members. And when we lost that bid, Rick French, who owns French West Vaughn over in Raleigh, a PR firm, was on the board. And I shared my resume around, and he saw that I had been a reporter and had some writing experience. So he offered me a job at his PR agency. And, I ended up working there for 6 years. And it was a tremendous education. I worked on the CIAA basketball tournament, which,
Yep.
We took that thing from a very small regional thing to a big national event. I had the opportunity to be a part of the PR team during the expansion of the ACC, which was a tremendous education. Sitting in those rooms and hearing the conversations around, the different universities who wanted to come in or who were going to be invited in, and why they were and why they weren't, all the kind of good stuff. So, left there, and then after 6 years, and went to IPG Mullen Lowe, and was there for almost 2 years and got a tremendous education on brand. So I went from a very tactical PR mindset to now I'm working at an ad agency, and you're looking at it everything from an integrated approach. And PR was, the last thing they thought about, because everything was pushed with advertising, but it was really the education and branding and brand planning that I got. And then after a couple of years, there, a former colleague of mine called me up and said, "Listen, I'm at this little PR agency called Allen Taylor Communications. We're going through a rebranding. We're going to be Taylor, and a lot of it's driven by sports and lifestyle and entertainment. I think you would love it here." And so at the time, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and she's originally from Charlotte, so we were trying to get back close to family, and they had an office here in Charlotte. And I met with Tony Signori and Brett Jukes, who's now with the Author Blank family of businesses down in Atlanta, but I was with NASCAR there for a while. But they kind of took me in and gave me an opportunity. And when I joined that place, it was a $5 million agency, and when I left, it was a $22 million agency. So and not because of me. I think I was a cog in the wheel, but certainly the education I got in building an agency, seeing how an agency grows, making smart decisions, being very true to your mission. And, they only have 15 clients by design. And, but I got a tremendous education there and was there for about 10 years. Left as an executive vice president, joined MWW out of New York, but I still lived in Charlotte. And I commuted back and forth for about a year and a half, and it got to be tough doing that because every time I saw my kids, they were bigger and I was missing so much. But really, that experience was the impetus for what I'm doing now.
Well, it's interesting. You have an interesting roadmap. I think you have a roadmap, which I call worth emulating. I'll get, like you probably do, I get resumes all the time from people, and they'll say, I have 10 years of experience, and I'll look at it and go, you really have 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. And that's not a good place to be. But if you think about your journey, I mean, you started on what I call the receiving end of the PR industry, which is the newspaper business that's going to ultimately do things. Then you migrate, there to really understanding kind of how you leverage sports properties with communications that leads you to a PR firm, that leads you to an ad agency, that leads you to another PR firm, especially a PR firm like Taylor that was re-engineering. I go way back with Alan. It's
I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, actually.
He remains a friend. He was a pioneer. I mean, he created sports PR. He's a guy that's never gotten enough credit. He was a publicist largely in the boxing industry, and ended up building quite an agency. We crossed paths when my little agency that nobody had ever heard of won the MasterCard World Cup business and kind of shocked the world. And Alan Taylor Communications was the PR for MasterCard at the time, and the account executive on that piece of business was a young man named Tony Signori. And so and what I liked about, again, not to digress, but what I liked about Tony was when Alan left, and Alan did something I thought was very commendable. He ended up selling the agency back to his staff instead of selling to a holding company, or he figured out a way to do some kind of an ESOP that worked well for him.
Yep.
But Tony said, I think there's another model.
I got a vision.
He did. He had this great vision, and that vision really was what you've just talked about, and then it's going to lead us to what we're going to really spend time talking about, which is I'll only want a few clients. I want, at one time I think Alan, and I loved Alan, but the laughter about Alan telling communications was if it moved, he pitched it. And if he didn't move, he kicked it till it moved, and he pitched it. And so I think they were a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of billings. And I think Tony had a vision, and then you come there and buy into the vision.
No doubt.
And you take a client like Allstate, and let's spend a little time talking about them. And you take an Allstate and you grow their billings.
Yeah, and that was kind of the genesis for the whole thing. I had been a part of teams that had grown business. And like you said, Tony and his partners, at the time, there were 10 of them that Mr. Taylor had sold the business to. And Tony was at the tip of that spear. And he had this vision of being like the Bain or McKinsey of the PR business. For so long, we'd gotten paid for neck down. He wanted to get paid for neck up, right? And so we had an opportunity with Allstate through, I think it was Joe Tripodi, who used to be a client.
Joe had been at MasterCard. Exactly.
That's right.
Yep. That's how it was.
He went to Allstate, and then I think later on to Coke and some other things. But he and Tony were very close, and they had an activation. They had taken on the sponsorship of the Allstate 400 at the Brickyard, and we had a history in racing. And it's really funny. I'm from North Carolina, but what I know about NASCAR and racing, you could probably put in about the tip of a pen, which is funny because my first assignment when I got there, they're like, "What do you know about racing?" I'm like, "Not a whole lot." They're like, "Well, good. You're in charge of the 50th running of the Daytona 500." I'm like, "Oh, super. That's great." Which went well. But that's a story for another day. But so for the Allstate thing, we were activating the sponsorship around the Allstate 400, and a guy that I ended up becoming very close with and still a good friend of mine to this day, Bates Granger, was kind of leading that. And I came on board, and Brett Jukes came to me and said, what do you, in addition to the racing, what do you know about college football? And I said, a little bit, you know. And meanwhile, I was salivating. I'm like, this is what I've been waiting for right here. I want to work on big properties with big brands. And so, they had the Allstate Nets, and we were asked to leverage an advertising campaign with Bergwood, the character who would,
Yep.
couldn't kick. He was supposed to be a kicker, but couldn't kick.
Yeah.
So, Bates ran the racing. I ran the college football. And, I've always had a couple of philosophies. You solve, you don't sell. If you're solving a client's problems, the business will take care of itself. And, good was, like Tony used to say, and I learned this from him, so I'm going to steal his words, but, good gets you fired. Great will get you more work, right? So it was the idea of doing great work. And, lo and behold, we did a great job. Next thing you know, it's, what do you know about Olympics? What do you know about motorcycles? What do you know about the Hispanic community? And we just kept, not only doing great work, but we just tried to stay out in front of them. And I think that was one of the things Pam Hollander at Allstate always said about us, is we were always kind of a step ahead of her. But, the true value of that client for me was the fact that we worked with other agencies. We worked with Octagon and IMG at the time, and their ad agency, Leo Burnett and Starcom, who did the media buying. And before, in the beginning, it was kind of, we were the new kid on the block. All those other agencies had been there. And, we kind of had to find our place. But once we did, they ended up calling us the five families. You had five agencies who were all owned by different entities, but we worked very, very well together. And that, again, was another piece that set me up for doing what we're doing now, because it was this integrated approach.
Well, I'm a big fan of Pam's.
Yeah, she's great.
She's just the person that said, this is how we're going to play. You're not going to be in individual agencies. You're going to be a part of Team Allstate, and everybody's going to play together. And of course, during that era, I was fortunate enough to sell Allstate a bunch of stuff. I brought the AFCA Good Works team, to them. And in fact, it's a funny story. Mike Murray at the time at IMG really liked it, and we took it in, and they said no. And then I came in the next year because I knew it was perfect for them, and they said no again. And then a guy named Patrick Pierce came in, and Patrick found my proposal in his files the first day he was on the job. And he called and said, I know this isn't still available. And I said, Patrick, it is available because it was perfect for you, and I haven't tried to sell it for anybody else. And that's turned out to be really good. And then when they became an NCA corporate partner, we just replicated that program with Good Works teams for the NABC and the WBCA.
That's right.
And so it was really fun.
And we worked on all that.
Yeah.
We worked on, it's funny you talk about the AFCA. Patrick, this is funny, Rick, because we worked together and didn't really even know it, but Patrick came to us, and, we're not a sponsorship evaluation agency, but it was, what could you guys do with this? We've said no to it a couple of times. And, there was not a lot of support for it, quite honestly, in the beginning. But we looked at it and said, talking with Mike Murray, like you said, we looked at it and said, hey, listen, here's an opportunity, because if I remember correctly, Allstate's broken up into 18 different regions around the country. I think it's 18. And some of those are very rural places. If you look at, the Dakotas and things like that. And we looked at it and said, you know what, if you're going to go all the way down to Division three schools, even NAIA schools, what a great opportunity to get into some of these markets that we traditionally wouldn't get into, and be able not only to tell the brand story, but push the good hands and all this, the messaging and that sort of stuff. And so I'd like to think that, when Bates and I looked at that and said, here's an opportunity to really get into these other markets, that was kind of the impetus of getting that over the hump, because they're like, yeah, you're right. How many schools you've never heard of had guys on that good good hands team, or the AFC, a good works team, excuse me. And that allowed us to go into markets, like I said, that we typically wouldn't go into. And man, we just really cleaned up from a PR perspective. So
well, we laugh.
I didn't realize.
We were the ones that brought that, and it's interesting. My wife and I, we would go to a lot of the events. We would go to the Sugar Bowl, to the events, or we would go to and my wife would say, "I'm such a failure. I mean, here's this 19-year-old with a foundation, a bone marrow transplant foundation as a sophomore."
It put your lack of accomplishments in perspective for sure. I always felt the same way. I'm like, gosh, these kids, man, I could barely find my way to class when I was in college, and these kids got it. They're taking the world by the tail. But yeah, I didn't realize that was you guys that had brought that to the table. And then, of course, like you said, we replicated that with NCAA and got in all those championships and developed a program for the College World Series. And so anyway, that was just one. That was kind of the blueprint for building business. And we, I won't share Taylor's business, but we did very well with Allstate, and we got it to the point where we didn't have to push it anymore because we were doing great work. If there was an assignment, Pam will call and say, you're our agency, but we were never agency of record. 10 years, never agency of record. And so it was always, there was those repeat pieces of business. Like you said, you knew the Sugar Bowl was going to come around every year. You knew once they signed the deal with the NCAA, you were going to have the Final Four and some soccer and things like that. But the other half of it, you had to get in there and find every year. And my leaders at my agency, they just saw the numbers. They wanted to, how do I get back to that number or even above it every year? And that kind of developed the approach that we use at TPC Growth now.
Well, it's interesting that you're really in the agency business only as good as your last project.
Man, I'm telling you.
And the fact that you're not an agency of record with a long, standing, contract forces you, I think, to just consistently do great work. So you've got your own shop now, TPC Growth, and it's got this unique twist.
Yeah.
And this twist is helping other agencies. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, well, I knew I had a knack for growing business. And 6 different times in my career, I've been a part of teams that grew. I happen to be maybe the account lead, but I certainly don't do it by myself. Grew business from, a small fledgling account into a multi-million-dollar account. And when, I left Taylor and had the opportunity to run new business globally at MWW, it really wasn't a situation where I had to go out and find new things. It was winning the RFPs and how you win business. And then at the end of my run there, I had 17 RFPs on my desk. So anybody in the agency business, I mean, you hear the number 17 RFPs, you just like, how do you even prioritize or tackle that? And that was, a good problem to have. But I also looked around the agency, which was a pretty good size, mid-sized independent agency. And I said, man, if we just grew all of these accounts by 10%, if you just grew them all by 10%, you would easily blow our new business goal right out of the water, and taking a focus of, you've already got the relationships, you've already done the hard part, you've won the business, and you're set up for that sort of thing. And so when I left MWW, I got a call from a former Taylor colleague who's now the CFO at one of the bigger publicly held holding companies. And she said, listen, our agencies across the board are having some trouble with organic growth. And I know you've got a history there. Would you mind coming in and talking to our leadership about just some philosophies and best practices? I'm like, absolutely. Would love the opportunity. So I did. I flew up to New York and met with that group of people. And certainly I try to, in our business now, I'm very sensitive to talk about the agencies we work with because a lot of those agencies don't want others to know they're tapping into outside resource like us. But I sat down and met with the holding company personnel, and we walked through some things, and I got introduced to a CEO at one of their bigger multinational firms. And we started talking about, some of the philosophies around organic growth. And I started sharing my point of view, and I was like, listen, just imagine if all the money and the dollars and the resources you put into new business, chasing things, what if you changed the paradigm? and you've invested that money or those resources at that time into the business you already have. When Rick, when we were coming along, it was a sexy thing to be in that room that was developing a new pitch. How do I get in that room? I want to be a part of that team. The guy over here in the corner, or the gal over here in the corner who was growing business, we're just steady Eddie. That wasn't the sexy thing, but that's the thing that pays the bills and really can create margins for an agency. So went up and met with them, and then this agency leader and I sat down and we developed a program called Accelerator. And the idea was to take accounts that were either stagnant, they thought had high potential, and this is the key part, had young leadership on the accounts, and how could we grow them? And so we identified 8 accounts, and after a quarter, we had uncovered about $900,000 in organic opportunities. And they were like, we'll take some more of that. And so I just kind of was signing up quarter after quarter with this agency. And at one point, I went to the CEO and said, listen, this is not a competitive thing. I'm not helping you pitch against another agency. I'm helping you grow what you've already won. I said, would you care if I took this and created a consultancy out of it? He told me to go for it, and I did. And it's really funny because you and I talked a couple of years ago when I first left MWW, and I think I told you, I said, man, I'm not really sure what I want to do next. And I was consulting with a couple of clients from a PR perspective, and you said, I'll give it about a year and it'll crystallize for you. And man, were you right. And, now we've got this thing, and I've brought on a partner, Brick Carter, who actually was one of my bosses at French Westfalen 20 years ago. He spent about 17 years with Fleischman Hiller. He developed that here in the Carolinas. And, now we're building this business. We solely consult with agencies on organic growth. So how can we go in and help you grow at the account level in order to grow at the enterprise level? And a byproduct of that, the big byproduct of that, has been changing the mindset of agencies and changing the mindsets of account leadership. Because, my joke is we're a society of liberal arts majors. Nobody knows how to rub 2 nickels together. So you get into this business because you can write, you're creative, you're strategic. For all those reasons, you want to do the work. But guess what? We're in business too. We're here to make money. And I think that gets lost on a lot of the junior staff because it's like, I remember being at Mullen and being told, even as a VP, just do what you do. Don't worry about the finances. Just do what you do. And I'm like, man, if I understood better how we make money, I could help you make more money. And that's one of the, I haven't done a lot of smart things, but one of the smartest things I ever did was go to Rick French and say, how do we as an agency make money? As an AE, I went to him. It's like, I don't understand. Like I'm being asked to move from one group to another group. I'm being asked to do all these things, and that's fine. But I'm kind of a purpose-driven person. I was like, I need to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when he explained, from a 30,000 foot level to an AE at the time, he explained to me how we made money, and I got it. And that has been kind of the genesis behind all this. But that was the notion is, all right, I've got a piece of business. I want it. How do I grow it? And it's also the idea from an account management perspective of unlearning what you think you already know. Because we're all taught by osmosis.
It is interesting. I find that so many agencies, but more importantly, so many agency people are like that butterfly in the meadow. They can't wait to get to another flower. They're just jumping from flower to flower to flower. Stephen Stills, he recorded a song years ago that said, if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with.
Love the one you're with.
And agencies tend to forget that. They're always chasing the next one. And I'm really intrigued by your tagline of liberating agencies from the RFP because I love the liberating piece. We're 17 years old and we're actually doing an RFP. We're finishing an RFP today. In 17 years, this is the 4th one I've done.
You got to be kidding me.
No, 4 in 17 years.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, because we just don't believe in that. Now, in the case of the business we're pitching now, we just think we're absolutely perfect. We're not perfect for every piece of business, but we're perfect for this one. And I can't tell you how many times I've said no to RFPs because I didn't see the long-term vision. The corporate clients and the properties that we've had for over a decade, and that's that we're obviously doing something right because we're growing those businesses. So talk about about how are you changing behavior, because that's the hard thing to do. How do you get them to start focusing on what you is it really your system that allows you to do that?
Now, listen, I think there's a lot of great consultancies out there, and some of them do some of what we do. But from what I've been able to find, we're one of the only consultancies, if not the only consultancy, that completely focuses on organic growth. And the challenge is getting people to understand that everybody thinks they're good at organic growth. And then when you point out a couple of things and you talk about some of the fundamentals, and they maybe I'm not that great at it, and what the possibilities are. But when you talk about how do we start, I typically tell this story of Ignaz Semmelweis. Do you have any idea who Ignaz Semmelweis was?
No.
Okay, well, back in the mid 1800s, he was predated kind of a gynecologist. He was a baby doctor.
Okay.
Right. And at the time, the infant mortality rate was just through the roof. And babies were dying, mothers were dying, et cetera, and they just couldn't really figure out why. Well, he had this theory that if you would wash your hands before you treated a patient, then there might be bacteria on your hands. That if you washed your hands, that might be a safer way to treat patients. And lo and behold, the mortality rate went down. More mothers were living, babies were living. And because of Ignaz Semmelweis, we're all here, right? Because he's the guy who said you need to wash your hands before you treat patients.
And I hope the people that are listening today in this coronavirus pandemic realize that if you wash your hands, you might still be here too.
That's right. It's not just getting here; it's the preservation.
Exactly.
But the reason I tell that story, and I heard that story at a seminar years ago, and I wish I could remember the man's name who told it because I'd give him credit, but the reason I tell that story is that seems like such a small shift, right? It doesn't seem like a big thing. Ignaz Semmelweis died in an insane asylum. His contemporaries thought he was nuts, right? So the idea of changing your approach to new business by just making this small move, it doesn't seem like it's such a big thing, but it's hard for people to get their heads wrapped around when they've done it the same way for so long. Right. And when we tell agencies that we work with, and when we do speaking engagements and webinars and things of that nature, is, listen, there's no rule book. There's a code of ethics for sure, but there's no rule book. Who told us we had to do it this way? And so the idea is, to unlearn and reframe your approach to new business. Now, we certainly believe in the RFP. New business is going to be part of agency life forever. That is part of the equation. But again, it's the deployment of your resources and the energy you put into it, and it's the idea of getting people to see, that we can grow accounts organically, and for us, that's building relationships, nurturing those relationships. It's not rocket science, but there's lots of times the excuses we use when we either lose an account or things are going sideways. The client constantly changed course and wouldn't stay with one strategy. Their competition spent more money. They brought in a new marketing manager who, hired his brother-in-law, whatever. Or the client. You
mean certainly it couldn't be me.
No, it could not be me.
Yeah.
When the excuses should be, we didn't listen carefully. We never clarified how we're going to work together. Our internal screw-ups killed us. We didn't staff the work properly. We didn't budget the work properly. Quite honestly, it got stale and we took them for granted. Right? Those are the real excuses. So when you can get somebody to understand that, the reason your business is not growing is because of you. It's like having one of those anonymous meetings. You've got to take some ownership and understand that it starts with you. And then the other thing we really get people to look at, what really gets people's attention, Rick, is we do this exercise, and I would encourage every agency, it doesn't matter what kind of agency you are, because the fundamentals of account management are the same regardless of the agency. But we do this exercise where we'll come in and we started this originally, and the agency we were working with just wanted senior people in the room. Because again, they wanted all the junior people just doing what they do. And I said, no. I think it's important you bring everybody from the AC all the way up to, whoever's running the business into the room. I said, because lots of times, we're taught to bend over backwards for our clients. Just bend over backwards and give them what they ask for and give them what they need, et cetera, to keep the business going and keep it, hopefully going in the right direction. But what we innately do is we give it all away. We give so much away in our business. And so what we do, we call it organizing your giving. It is the idea of you come in, get on a whiteboard, chalkboard, whatever you have these days, and you write down everything you do for that client, everything you're scoped for, but every little favor you do for them. Because that AE might be doing some things that you don't know that they're doing in the best interest of the business, doing little favors because that's what they've been taught to do.
And not getting paid for it.
And not getting paid for it. So you write all those things down, and then we go back and we highlight, say, okay, now we're going to highlight all the things we get paid for. And that's when people's eyes bulge out of their head, because typically what we found is about 75% of the stuff you get paid for. So you're giving away about a quarter of your service and your time. So I say, all right, well, the first thing before we can grow is how do we get paid for the stuff we're already doing? How do we get paid for that? And I know you can't walk across the street to the client and say, hey, listen, I've been giving this to you for any number of years. Now you've got to pay me for it. You can't do that, right? But you can monetize and productize those things and either deploy them to other clients, or if you've been working on that account for a while and you know the trends, you get out in front of them and you weave those things in. So, the first thing to do in terms of growing your business organically is getting paid for all the stuff you do instead of giving it away. And, that's kind of how we get going with people is you got to have a very honest conversation with yourself. You've got to examine what you're giving away, and let's productize or monetize the things you are giving away. And let's start there. But what we end up doing is we work with all these account leaders. And for us, if we're working with account leaders 3 to 6 months, you shouldn't need us anymore, because there's only so many tricks of the trade, right? And we've developed this library of tactics and strategies, about 150 tactics and strategies. Some of them are quick wins. Some of them are longer term plays, but they're all aimed at growing business. And there's nothing slick about it. You're not pulling anything over on the client. You're solving their problems. You're helping. You have to look at your agency. That client is making an investment in you. They're investing in their business. They need it to go well, right? And, the best thing you can do is make sure they understand, well, I'm in business too. We've got people to pay. I've got goals, et cetera. And the people who are scared to talk about money will not do well. You've got to be able to talk about the financial side of it. And for us, that is part of it, is saying, let's recognize we need to be financially savvy and be able to talk about those things comfortably. And our business will mature in a much more productive way. So,
yeah, unless you're Walmart or Amazon, you don't want to be a commodity. And agencies have just commoditized their billing so much, I think.
That's the thing, man. And so for us, you were asking us about, is it approach or print? There are some principles. There is a TPC growth way to approach things, but because we don't do train the trainer, and what I mean by that, we don't come in and do a day-long training, get everybody fired up about something and walk away. We'll only do trainings if there is work to be done afterwards as a follow-up. Because when I was growing accounts as an account leader, it's because I was immersed in the business. I knew where all the bodies were buried. I knew where all the warts were and that type of thing. So you've got to get immersed in the business. And, like you just said, we don't want to be vendors. We want to be treated as partners. But, when you look at this pandemic, and that's a couple of things we've talked about on some other webinars is, we want to be seen as partners. But how many times do you exude partnership to your client? You want to be treated as one, but how many times are you exuding partnership? And this, for us, this COVID pandemic has been an incredible opportunity to exude that partnership. So whether your client turned off the budget, turned off the spigot, if you can't give them 48 hours a week anymore, can you give them an hour? Can you help problem solve? Can you ask them what their strategic imperatives are beyond what your original assignment was? Tell us what 3 of your biggest problems are right now. Let us think about them for you. It's the I call it the Johnny Appleseed effect. Right now is a great opportunity to be planting seeds. And, we've seen in this pandemic, some of our clients have either won back business or have actually grown their business during the pandemic. Now, luckily, some of those businesses weren't in travel and tourism and that type of thing. One is, but a very large property in that business. But it's those sort of things that you have to take a very, ABC type approach to, and you got to get immersed in it because it's not a cookie cutter approach.
Well, this is a time for agencies to get better. It's a time for agencies to bring ideas to clients, even in those what I call debilitated business lines like travel and tourism. Because when we come out of it, whoever's prepared the best is going to grow the best. Mark, we have a lot of agency people that listen to the podcast, thankfully. So
Sure.
You've got a unique niche. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, they can visit our website, which is tpcgrowth.com. They can find us on LinkedIn. There's a TPC Growth page. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. Or they could just give me a call. It's 704-307-5255, and you can find that information on the website. But, any agency that we talk to, we will give them a free 30-minute consult because we believe in what we're doing. And so we want to put our money where our mouth is. And if we show value and can help, the business will take care of itself. So.
Well, let me close by saying to all but the agency folks out there, listen, if you don't want to make any more money, don't call Mark. But if you do, if you want to increase your revenues in a thoughtful, responsible, and sustainable way, let me encourage you to talk to TPC Growth. Hey, pal, thanks a bunch for being with us today from the bridge.
Man, I really appreciate it. It's always great to talk to you, Rick. I always get a lot out of it.
Looking back, I seem to have been mostly negative from the old soapbox the last few weeks. And those that know me know I'm not a negative person. I'm actually the little boy who got up on Christmas morning looking for the pony in the pile of horse manure. So here's a positive view today from the soapbox. These are 6 little stories with lots of meanings. Once all of the villagers decided to pray for rain. On the day of prayer, all the people gathered, but only one boy came with an umbrella. That is faith. When you throw babies in the air, they laugh because they know you will catch them. That is trust. Every night we go to bed without any assurance of being alive the next moment or the next morning, but we still set the alarms to wake up. That is hope. We plan big things for tomorrow in spite of zero knowledge of the future. That is confidence. We see the world suffering, but still we get married and have children. That is love. On an old man's shirt was written a sentence. I am not 80 years old. I am sweet 16 with 64 years of experience. And that is attitude. Have a happy day and live your life like these 6 stories. And remember, good friends are the rare jewels of life. Difficult to find and impossible to replace. And that's a positive view today from the soapbox. I absolutely love fried chicken. My wife Charlotte makes wonderful fried chicken nuggets. But on this week's On the Road with Rick, let me tell you about a great fried chicken place in Mark Riggs' hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. It's Price's Chicken Coop. It's actually a takeout-only place with real deal fried chicken. I mean crunchy, juicy, flavorful Yardbird. Great sides like fries, coleslaw, and potato salad, plus wonderful hush puppies. All in a takeout box to eat in the car or somewhere else. The chicken's so good, I challenge you to leave the parking lot before you've started eating it. Now, it's a cash-only place, so you need to bring money with you. It's Price's Chicken Coop in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the road with Rick. I hoped we helped provide some value to you today from the bridge. Thanks to Mark Riggs for bringing some insightful thinking for getting more revenues. We'll see you out on the water next week with a very special show you won't want to miss. This is the Captain, signing off.